Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. This is the 7th annual meeting of the annual general meeting of the Canadian Business History Association des Affaires Canadiennes. My name is Dimitri Anastakis, and I have the pleasure of acting as a director of this organization and also as the chair of the board for the past 3 years. This year, for our AGM, our special panel of speakers, we're being presented today as a hybrid meeting. We're here at Rotman and also online, and thank you everyone for attending in any capacity that you can. As we are having a hybrid meeting, I'd like to outline a few procedures to follow. For those of you who are online, please keep your microphones muted during the presentation. But if you do have questions, you can type them into the chat or just raise your hand, and we should be able to spot you to be able to give you an opportunity to unmute and ask any questions that you might have. For voting, when it comes to voting, we previously asked that you submit your voting preferences by proxy. We have received a great number of proxies for this purpose. If you did not submit a proxy and wish to register your vote, please use the chat function, and we will note your voting preference. That's water for Virginia and Tom. If you could just pass that over, thank you very much. If you could slide those over, thank you very much. On today's agenda, which is on your screen, we have a number of different issues to attend to, all of which is the basis of governance of the organization, including reporting on its membership and a report on the financial condition of the organization. After we get through those formal remarks and formal matters, which I think will take about 45 minutes, we will turn it over after a short break to hear a talk from our guest speakers, which we're delighted to have Dr. Virginia Torrey and Professor Thomas Telfer on the history of the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, which will give them a proper introduction in due course. But now we have to turn our attention to the formal business items that must be dealt with at an annual general meeting. This is part and parcel of the stuff that we do. And in that regard, I now call upon the Secretary-Treasurer of the CBHA-ACHA, Mr. Mark Bonham, to provide his report on the requirement that proper notice has been given to the members and a necessary quorum is present to conduct the business of the meeting. Mark, go ahead.
Thank you, Dimitri. As Secretary-Treasurer of the CBHA-ACHA, I hereby confirm that the proper notice of this meeting, pursuant to Bylaw Number 1, Section 10.04, being 21 days' notice, has been provided to members. I also hereby confirm that the form of notice, pursuant to Bylaw Number 1, Section 12, has also been met. I also confirm that the requirement under Bylaw Number 1, Section 10.01, that an annual general meeting be held, has now been met by the conducting of this meeting. I also confirm that pursuant to Bylaw Number 1, Section 10.10, a quorum is present at this meeting in person or by proxy to properly conduct the affairs of the meeting, and that the meeting may now proceed.
Great. Thank you, Mark. That's great. And I'm just going to skip through. I would now like to introduce the president of the CBHA-ACHA to address the audience and provide some comments on the past year's activities. Joe Martin is the former director of the Canadian Business and Financial History Initiative at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto and President Emeritus of Canada's History Society. His research is focused on the development of case studies about Canadian business in a global context. But his most recently completed book, which many of you know, is well-received and includes a well-received accompanying documentary which compares the Canadian American financial systems from the late 18th century to 2008 and was co-written with Chris Kobach, as you recall. I'll turn it over to our president, Joe. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much for attending. Please allow me to briefly touch on some of just two of the highlights of fiscal year 2021-22, our strategic exercise and our successful fundraising, then move on to a look ahead to our near-term future, 2025-26, and finish with a comment about the big issue facing all historians, that is, business history must be added to the mix. As I told you a year ago, for the first quarter last year, our first quarter last year began with a strategic retreat where we were assisted by one of Canada's leading strategic consultants, pro bono I might add, and one of our other members. From that retreat came the decision to expand our mission from preserve and present to preserve, present, and engage. We will continue our efforts to improve existing archives and to encourage new archives. We will continue our efforts to not only support academic research and publications in Canadian history, but also to make business history more accessible to the public. What was new coming out of that strategic exercise was to encourage the teaching of business history in schools, community colleges, and universities, with emphasis on history department and management schools in the case of history universities, and to accelerate the growth of corporate histories and biographies, not just in print, but also in podcasts and documentaries. For example, a young director approached me about making a documentary about the book that the late Chris Kobrak and I did on From Wall Street to Bay Street. Quite frankly, I was surprised, even though the Chinese had approached us about doing a Mandarin edition, which we did. But we proceeded with the documentary with WNED based in Buffalo, the PBS affiliate. And they liked the documentary, and we had a Toronto screening in April. Subsequently, that document has been shown on 85% of the PBS network. The former CEO of WNED said they'd never seen a response like that before. Furthermore, we're now contracted to do 2 more documentaries, one on President Jefferson and the search for the Western Passage, beginning with Sir Alexander Mackenzie. So it'll be interesting for American audiences to learn that somebody got to the Pacific Ocean before Lewis and Clark. And the banking and currency during the American Civil War and the creation of Canada, because in case you didn't know it, for our 2 countries, the crucial decade in the past 250 years in terms of currency and banking was the 1860s, and that extraordinary period of the violence of the American Civil War and the coming together of Canada. While I hope that some Canadian network will pick these up, we're happy that PBS is doing so. And we're also in touch with the podcasts. I'll be meeting next week with the Knowledge Project. Fundraising. When we met a year ago, I was able to tell you the wonderful news that the L.R. Wilson Foundation had given us $1 million and committed to matching another $1 million if we raised that much. In January 2002, when we last met, we had raised $150,000 of the million, i.e. 15%, and submitted a $1 million proposal that did not bear fruit. By the end of the first quarter of 22, we had somewhere between $500,000 and $750,000 with 3 months to go. For Mark and I, that was a period of nail biting, but by June 22nd, 8 days to go, we could report to the Wilson Foundation that we had raised $1 million. The largest amount came from Ontario, but we also had major commitments from Manitoba, Minnesota, and Nova Scotia. And just for your information, the cost of our campaign was $125, or a little over 0.01%, which is a lot lower than most, and we're still hoping to recover that $125. And so when we look to our 2022 progress report, which I trust that's been mailed out, hasn't it, Mark? Which you should have received in the mail, you will see that our assets are $2.6 million. 2 years ago, the comparable figure was 8,500. And so we're deeply, deeply grateful to the assistance from the Wilson Foundation and to our many other donors. I kind of relaxed in July because I was so pleased with our results. But then I started to have some serious health issues, and I did not do a lot in the last quarter of the fiscal year, other than what I can only call a spirited discussion with two of my colleagues, Dimitri and Mark, who have been carrying the load ever since. But although the discussion was spirited, we've remained friends. Dimitri and Mark will bring you up to date on other aspects of our achievements in the past year, and I would like to turn to the near-term future. I'm not a big fan of long-term planning, but I do like to look ahead. Given that we are a 6-year-old organization, I think a 3-year look ahead is appropriate, where we must grow, deliver, establish a team. Given those priority outcomes, we as an organization must sit down and establish some quantitative goals for fundraising to cover the costs of our current and future organization. In terms of membership, we must decide not only how many more members we need, but do we need to focus on certain types of members? And while we're at it, we need to quantify other outputs such as the newsletter, CBH talks, etc. Having done that, we must staff up. To this point, we have been an entirely voluntary operation. Can we continue that way? Or do we have to start engaging staff on a contract basis? Or do we have to go further and recruit permanent staff? All these questions require answers before we meet you next January. Now let me turn to the big issue, business history. I've seen somewhere, more than one place, that business must be inclusive. And when that is said, it is time to recognize that business history has been excluded, not included. Let me give you 3 illustrations of what I mean. In October, I wrote a piece for the prospectus, our newsletter, on Canadian aspects of the great stock market crash of 1929. I wanted to do this because I feel that so much of our understanding of events revolves around Wall Street and does not recognize that in Canada, the crash marked the shift of the financial center of Canada from St. James Street, as it used to be called, now Rue Saint-Jacques, as it was once before, to Bay Street in Montreal, to Bay Street in Toronto. As I was going home to my personal library one day to prepare, I thought an excellent source about Toronto will be the biography of Premier Howard Ferguson, in part of the Ontario Historical Society series. Howard Ferguson received the largest majority in the history of Ontario on the day of the crash. To my astonishment, there was not a word on the subject that he was elected amidst this drastic event. I looked at the next biography of this series and discovered that the mining industry, which was so important in Ontario and Canada's recovery, employed over 100,000 workers in the late 30s, wasn't mentioned, although agriculture and forestry were. What kind of history is that? In the current issue of the Literary Review of Canada, there is a book review, actually 2 books reviewed, by Matt Bellamy, a business history professor from Carleton. The title of the piece is On This Day, in Defense of a Beleaguered Discipline, meaning history per se. The first book he reviewed is Trilby Kent's The Vanishing Past, Making the Case for the Future of History. Sounds encouraging, doesn't it? But Trilby lists 13 different kinds of histories, including Black, Marxist, Indigenous, but not business history. In other words, we can't even make a list of 13. And Bellamy doesn't even think that is worth a comment. The second book is Aaron Hughes' 10 Days That Shaped Modern Canada. The Multiculturalism Act is mentioned, not the FTA, nor the NAFTA. Surely those agreements have had as big an impact on Canadians as multiculturalism. For the later 1980s, he chooses the shooting at Montreal's École Polytechnique, a truly awful act, but he ignores the establishment of the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, OSFI, which saved hundreds of thousands of Canadians their life savings in 2008, unlike what happened in the USA and in many other countries as well. We must do something about the shameful neglect of Canadian business history. And that is why our chairman and I will be meeting next week to discuss the best way for the CBHA to learn from our counterpart, the EBHA, the European History Association. We're meeting in August of this year on the topic of the relevance of business history. Thank all of you who are members who have joined us today. You're among the chosen few who prefer the question, why not, to why? Why not a Canadian Business History Association? Why not business history in the classroom, not only of our universities, but also of our community colleges and public schools? Thanks to our board members and to my two fellow executive members, Chair Dimitri Anastaskis, second holder of the Wilson Curry Chair in Canadian Business at the University of Toronto and Rotman School of Management, and Mark Bonham, our indefatigable Secretary-Treasurer, Executive Director of the Veritas Foundation. For those of you who don't know, Veritas celebrates impactful philanthropic pursuits and supports donor capital. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Joe, for those wonderful remarks and for your comments. I have to move into a little bit more of a formal section of our meeting's agenda, which is the election of directors. And it is now time to consider our first set of motions to the meeting, the election of directors to the CBHA-ACHA. Under the bylaws of our corporation, directors are elected to 3-year rotating terms. As such, in this 7th annual meeting of shareholders, there are a set of directors to be elected with a 3-year term. The motion to be put to the meeting is that the following directors be elected to a 3-year term: Dimitri Anastaskis, Tabitha Fritz, Jeremy Mosher, and Jason Russell. The biographies of these individuals were provided in the meeting material forwarded to all members with the notice of this meeting. Can I now ask a member to move that this motion be presented? I'm going to say Virginia. Okay, Virginia Torrey has moved the motion. And do we have a seconder for the motion? Thomas, are you a member of the association? Yes. Oh, so Thomas. Keshav, I'm not sure if you are, but I will take you later on. Are there any questions or discussion on the motion for the election of these directors? If not, I will call for a vote on the motion. All those in favor? I'm going to just take a quick look online here, and it looks like it's unanimous. Okay, great. The motion has carried, I would say if there's opposed, but it's pretty much unanimous, so the motion will carry. We now turn our attention to the financial affairs of the organization. For this, I will ask our indefatigable Secretary Treasurer of the organization, Mr. Mark Bonham, to provide his remarks. Turn it over to Mark. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dimitri. In reviewing the financial statements of the CBHA-ACHA at this time, Please remember that these are 12-month reviewed reports, externally independently reviewed, to September 30th, 2022, with a comparison to the same period in 2021. Note as well that much of 2021 was impacted by the global health pandemic and its intended social distancing and public meeting restrictions, which did limit much of our fundraising and expenditures during that particular comparative year. Despite the persistence of the health challenge, it gives me great pleasure to state that your board and management was able to adapt very proficiently to the situation, to the extent that there has been no material negative financial impact on the CBHA-ACHA to this time. The most significant event, of course, of the past financial year has been the successful conclusion of the Matching Endowment fundraising campaign. As Joe has already commented on that, I won't add much more to it, but will point out that it provides tremendous financial stability and security for the organization in perpetuity. The independently reviewed financial statements were provided to members prior to this meeting in the form of the annual report. So looking firstly at the statement of operations, the revenues of the organization come from membership fees, donations, conference income, and book sales. Membership fees increased by 20% in the past year. Most notable is the increase in donation income, of course, from the successful campaign. The pandemic and restrictions on global travel meant that there was no conference income in 2021 or 2020. A very small amount of revenues earned from the book sales. Expenses of the organization to September 30th, 2022 can be broken down into four principal areas. The organizational expenses incurred in operating the organization, expenses of holding an annual conference if we were to hold one, the costs associated with printing of any conference books and other materials, and grants, scholarships, and awards to members. In the first category, the principal expenses relate to managing the organization's website, its membership, and other communication activities such as the newsletter, the costs associated with the ongoing promotion of the organization, and daily administrative tasks. These organizational expenses were comparable in size from 2021 to 2022, with the exception of the advertising expense, and that really refers to some of the strategic retreats that the board held to manage the campaign and the 5-year planning. The organization created a scholarship and awards committee, which solicits applications from members and presents such awards. This committee has a set of criteria for the awarding of research grants, travel grants, and other scholarship grants for members, including an appropriate application form and a review procedure. Applications for grants and awards remain depressed relative to the historical trend because many academic conferences and events were canceled and moved to online virtual basis with no costs. So that explains why they remain low relative to what we would like them to be at. Turning to the balance sheet now, which I will just bring up. The operations of the organization were financed from the revenues earned and the cash and investment balance. The board reviews the cash flow forecast for the organization on a quarterly basis to ensure the financial sustainability of the organization as a not-for-profit. Of material significance this year is the increase in the assets and net equity of the organization through the successful completion of the fundraising campaign and the receipt of the Matching Wilson Foundation endowment, for which we are eternally grateful to the Wilson Foundation for that. This, of course, dramatically changes the financial stability of the CBHA in perpetuity. Because the CBHA-ACHA is a not-for-profit, membership-driven organization, its success depends almost entirely on its ability to retain that membership. Your management is dedicated to continue to grow that membership across all of its categories to ensure the long-term viability and participation of the organization and the continued promotion of the study of Canadian business history. I'm happy to answer any questions on either the balance sheet or income statement, cash flow, any questions at all.
Let's see if there are any questions from audience members. If they do, they can unmute. It's probably easier if they unmute and raise their voices as opposed to me looking. So if there are any questions from online audience members? No? Okay. Okay, thank you, Mark. So I'm just going to stop sharing this for a moment and return to there. That's the agenda. Thank you, Mark, for the financial report. The next item for business is the motion to the members regarding the financial statements of the organization for the period ended September 30th, 2020, in which I would like to propose the motion that those financial statements are hereby accepted and approved. Can I please have a mover for the motion to accept? Virginia again. A seconder? Keshab, you want to? Okay,
Yeah, I second the motion.
Keshab. Are there any questions or discussions for the motion? Mark has already asked for any questions. Okay, all those in favor of accepting the statements for September 30th to 2022? Okay, I declare the motion passed. I would now like to table an additional motion to the members that the organization reappoint Ms. Hema Murdoch, CA, as the review auditor for the 2022-2023 fiscal year. I'm proposing the motion. Is there a seconder for the motion? Joe Martin. Are there any questions or discussions on the motion for the appointment of a auditor? I will call the question. All those in favor? Okay. Great. Any opposed? The motion is carried. Great. Thank you for that. I would now, as a board member, present you with a quick report on a membership. And the first thing I want to do is recognize our corporate members. They do contribute significantly to the vitality of the organization in terms of their sponsorship. There are 11 charter large corporate members, and I'm going to read out their names in the order that they joined. The TD Financial Group, Scotiabank, the Canada Life Assurance Company, the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, the Bank of Montreal, the Hudson's Bay Company History Foundation. At that moment, I'm going to put on my beaver pelt hat that I was wearing for giving a lecture today in my class on the fur trade, since I'm mentioning the Hudson's Bay Company History Foundation, Deloitte, National Bank Financial, Repas Sugar, Black and McDonald. And thank you to those large corporate members. The small corporation member to date is the Heathbridge Capital Management firm. I'd also like to report that in terms of individual members and memberships, I'm happy to report that we have a total of 219 individual members, which Mark already went through, which is a growth compared to 201 in 2001 and 174 in 2020. So we are on an upward growth trajectory. These members are a mix of academics, archivists, corporate executives, students, and young scholars or archivists, and the general public. The 2022 annual report, which you all received, presents a graphical breakdown of this membership, which shows a good distribution geographically and in terms of the breakdown of different types of members. I'm particularly happy to report on a large number of subscribers to our monthly newsletter. As of today, the newsletter has over 2,200 monthly subscribers, which is a pretty fantastic number. And it means that we are having an impact well beyond our membership and the kinds of events that we do. And we're going to continue to reach out to those subscribers to get them even more engaged. It really does reflect the tremendous amount of interest in what we're doing, and it is a great sign of the interest in Canadian business history. I'd also like just to take a moment to make a few general comments on what the organization has been doing and has planned for the coming year. And in this regard, I echo Joe's comments a little bit and highlight just a few things that are in our annual report and mention a few other notable aspects and matters for our organization. As Joe indicated and Mark has indicated as well, we have had a very successful 2022 capped by the completion of our major fundraising campaign, a national fundraising campaign, which Mark and Joe detailed has been successful. On July the 25th, 2022, we made a formal announcement to our membership that we had met our fundraising goal and that the association's $3 million endowment campaign had been successfully completed. And at this juncture, I'd like to thank all of the members and anyone who donated and contributed to this campaign. I'd especially like to thank Joe and Mark for their tireless efforts in achieving this. They really do deserve incredible recognition. And of course, I would like to particularly thank the L.R. Wilson Foundation. Without the L.R. Wilson Foundation's contributions in terms of getting this ball rolling, we would not be here at the end of a successful campaign. And the gesture that the Wilson Foundation has made in supporting Canadian business history in this manner is, in Mark's words, something that will be with us in perpetuity and will have a lasting effect on scholarship, students, scholars, and business history and its importance in Canada. So that's an amazing thing. And building upon that, the endowment will allow us to undertake a number of initiatives in the coming years. And again, this echoes a little bit of what Joe's mentioned. Some of the projects include the digitization and platforming of approximately 330,000 Financial Post corporate intelligence cards from the 1920s all the way to the 1990s, which are at risk of being lost. They're sitting in boxes up in Downsview, and that intellectual property may well be destroyed unless we get to it and digitize it. It's a major project that will probably take up to 5 years. The Financial Post digitized collection will be made available to interested researchers and potentially the public through the Milt Hiller's Library here at the Rotman School of Management. And it'll be an amazing resource going forward for anyone interested in Canadian history along with business history. The endowment will also enable the association to expand its flagship annual award that will also include additional recognition for individuals, organizations, and projects that have worked to advance the cause of business history in Canada. The CBHA is working with the Rick Waugh Foundation to establish the Rick Waugh Foundation Award in Business History. And we, again, particularly thank the Waugh Foundation for their contributions in that regard. This will enable us to create an award that speaks to any contributions beyond book and article prizes, but really recognizes the work of individuals and all kinds of different projects that advance the cause of Canadian business history. I'm happy to also announce that in 2023, we will be launching a new prize specifically aimed at undergraduate business history and business students in Canada. I'm very pleased to announce the L.R. Wilson National Undergraduate Essay Prize in Business History, which will be awarded every 2 years, will be open to every undergraduate student across the country. It is a $1,000 prize that will be granted to the best essay in any level of undergraduate teaching. So this is a major undertaking for us in terms of outreach, but also in terms of generating interest from students and hopefully faculty to push forward the idea of business history as a worthwhile and a useful path in history. As I said, it'll be awarded every other year. And just as a reminder at this juncture, I would like to remind everyone listening and viewing that our best book and article prize competitions are open until February 28th for those of you who are interested in submitting a potential article or book prize. And we have received a number so far in that regard. Those are vibrant aspects of our organization's outreach and support. Now, along with the endowment campaign, the association, its board, and its membership have been active on a number of fronts in terms of granting prizes and awards and also doing other activity. So I'd just like to mention that our new Chris Kobrak Fellow for 2022 to 2024, the Chris Kobrak Fellowship is a doctoral graduate and postdoctoral fellowship awarded to students who are working on business history projects. And it has been awarded to Nicholas Fast, a PhD candidate at the University of Toronto. His project is entitled Packing Up, Meatpackers' Encounters with Industrial Capitalism and Deindustrialization in Winnipeg and Chicago, 1960 to 1988. Congratulations to Nick. I'd also like to recognize the winner of the Best Scholarly Article in Canadian Business History for 2022, which is awarded to Michel Dehaene, a PhD candidate at the Université de Montréal, for his article Tout le monde voyage, l'agence en arrivée et les débuts de l'industrie touristique en Canada, 1894 to 1939. I could do the numbers, but it would take me a second to do 1800. This was published in the Canadian Historical Review in September of 2021. It is a reflection of the kinds of awards and the kinds of quality research and publications that we receive in our award competition. I'd also like to recognize Jean-Philippe Mathieu, who I think is on our call today. You might as well give us a wave, Jean-Philippe, a PhD candidate at McGill University, who was awarded the inaugural Desotal Research Fund in Private Enterprise History and Law for 2022 for his project, A Social History of Montreal Rolling Mills, 1868 to 1903. The Desotal Research Fund is generally supported by the Marcel A. Desotal Center for Private Enterprise and Law at the University of Manitoba in the Faculty of Law. And again, nominations are open for the award until February 28th as well. And I'd like to specifically thank Virginia Torrey publicly. She was pivotal in bringing the idea of the Desotal Prize to us and collaborating with us in establishing that, which is going to be beneficial for students going forward for years to come. And we know as students and scholars that every time you get something like this, an award like this, it's not just a line on a CV, it means a lot in terms of your academic and professional development. I'd also like to mention that while the association intends to return to live conferences and events in 2023 and 2024, and we do have some discussions about that, the CBHA continues to provide engaging online discussions through its talks, the CBHA Talks, which bring together historians, academics, business leaders, and the general public for a series of wide-ranging, well-considered presentations and discussions. All of these are available thanks to Mark on our website, and they're fantastic. I use them as teaching tools. I tell students to go check them out because some of them are so excellent in terms of framing and providing the context of all kinds of issues that are not just relevant for history, but the present and the future. Just a couple of these that we had in 2022 include in April, we had a discussion between our president, Joe Martin, and Kevin Faraday, who was a producer and director on the documentary From Wall Street to Bay Street, a documentary preview and discussion. In July, we had key events in Canadian mining history with Deborah McComb as the moderator. The panelists include Dr. Jacqueline Allison, Glenn Nolan, Dr. John Sanlos, and Jane Wernick. And in October, we had a look back at the Canadian forest product industry, which was moderated by board member Jeremy Mosher of National Bank, and included panelists Michael Stamm, who is a professor at Michigan State University, who is also a previous award winner of our Best Book Prize, Martin Fairbank, a consultant, and Mike Reed, who is involved with K2 and Associates. The CBHA looks forward to more events and outreach in 2023, and we encourage all historians whose work intersects with business, the economy, consumption, technology, or any other aspect that is related to business in our capitalist world. That's pretty much everything, friends, to consider joining our organization. At this juncture, I'd like to take a moment to recognize and thank our board members for their work this year. Our board members have acted on prize committees, they've organized panels and sessions, they've presented their work at conferences and conducted valuable outreach to archival professionals, business programs at colleges, and numerous other activities. I'd like to thank each and every one of our board members for their contributions this year and going forward. It really is a volunteer organization that depends on the good work of people, and I'd like to recognize them. In particular, I'd like to recognize and thank Stephen Salmon, our indefatigable book review editor, there's that word again, of the Prospectus, who is stepping down after 5 or 6 years of fantastically productive years in the position. I know from the Prospectus and the emails that go around that the book reviews are one of the highlights of what we do, and people really look forward to it. And Stephen has just done an incredible job over the last 5 or 6 years in a professional capacity, producing a great list of book reviews. And I want to thank Stephen personally on behalf of the board and the membership for his excellent service. He will be staying on until the spring when we will welcome a new book review editor. And I'm very pleased and happy to announce that Professor Elsbeth Heeman of McGill University has agreed to take over from Stephen, which is a great reflection of the kind of excellence that Stephen has provided. Professor Heeman is a leading scholar in our profession and our country. We look forward to working with Elsbeth and are thrilled to have her as our book review editor. Finally, I'd like to take a moment to especially thank my colleagues, friends, and sometimes, a clash of titans people, Joe and Mark. It's such a pleasure working with you, and it's a great pleasure for me to be able to publicly recognize the incredible amount of work that the two of them do in keeping this organization going, creating this organization, keeping it going, and ensuring that it will last decades into the future. Joe and Mark, without the two of you and your efforts, our organization would simply not exist, and it would not have grown and developed as successfully as it has in the last few years. And I thank you on behalf of everyone involved in the broader project of business history and Canadian history. Thank you so much, sincerely, for all the work that you've done. I'd like to now open the floor to any general questions or comments from members present in the audience or those online. If anybody wishes to comment, Mr. Douglas Gould has something he'd like to say.
Thank you so much. I'm a newcomer, and I'm not being paid to say this, but I'm very impressed by what I hear from the chairman and the president. I was the last president of the Canadian Institute of International Affairs, the first president of the Canadian National Council under Jim Balsley, which is a whole other story.
Yes.
I also ran something called the National Conversation in Asia, the Asian Pacific Foundation, so I know NGOs. So to raise money is extremely difficult to do. I think what you've done, I don't know how you did it, but it's incredibly impressive, very difficult to do. The other thing that's difficult to do is increase membership, and you've done that. And alongside that, you have a very impressive regime in the form of awards and prizes. I think that's fantastic, and the content is excellent. I just, reading on the subway today, Canadian History magazine, I think it's excellent, so congratulations.
Well, thank you very much. That says a lot coming from you, Doug, and we really appreciate it. I don't know if people at home were able to hear those comments because I can't tell if the room is wired well enough. Can I get a thumbs up from people so people could hear Doug's comment? That means I don't have to repeat how wonderful he thinks we are, which is great. But for those who didn't hear, he thinks we're doing a pretty good job. And I will say, on the fundraising point, that is primarily because of Joe and Mark, really. That's the main aspect of that. They've done that. And there's a question or comment in the chat. Go ahead, just unmute yourself and go ahead.
Yeah, just from me, Dimitri, it's Andrew Ross here. I just didn't hear Doug's last name, so we heard the comments pretty clearly online, but just wasn't sure who it was.
Douglas Gould, G-O-O-L-D.
Okay, cool.
Sure. And you can Google Douglas because he has quite a track record in business history, publishing, and various other types of things.
Just one thing I can add very quickly is, since Joe was saying how hard it is to engage people with business history in terms of courses and so on, I was also editor of the Report of Business in the Globe and Mail, editor of the magazine. And if you want to know where they make money, they make it on business, if not business history. So there is a little bit of sunshine in this dark horizon.
Yeah, especially in the media world. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Doug. Other comments from our virtual audience? Okay, great. Well, we're pretty much almost on time as far as I can tell. And with that, I would like to conclude the formal business matters of the AGM. We're going to take a short break. I'm going to ask for an adjournment because we have to officially close the meeting, and then we'll have a quick adjournment for about 7 minutes. I think, are you guys okay with about a 5 or 7 minute adjournment? And then we'll return back and I will be able to have the pleasure of introducing our speakers. So I'll ask for an adjournment. Oh, Jason, you have your hand up. I'm sorry, I missed you there. Did you want to say something or vote to adjourn?
I'll do both, but first I was going to say we do Tabitha and I each had a funny request to bring forward. You want to just send it directly to the board, or do you want to talk about it now?
A funny request.
I presented it to the board already. I
Oh,
did.
did you?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Do you want a motion to adjourn though?
Sure. I move to adjourn for 7
Okay.
minutes.
Can I get a seconder? Doug, thank you very much. Okay, and with that, if we can have a vote on the motion to adjourn, all those in favor? It's always the easiest thing to do, except if you're a Republican in the House of Representatives in 2023. A motion to adjourn. Thank you very much. We'll return at 6:12 or 6:11 or 6:12 to have our speakers give their presentation. Thank you very much.